Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's webinar. It's lovely seeing you guys all here. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and join me. And we're going to be talking about governance today. But before we hop in and start off at the webinar, just a few housekeeping things. I've scheduled us for an hour and a half today because I really wanted to go through governance is really important in RTOs, and especially given that since the 2025 standards came out, that we are at a point in RTO, I suppose, our regulatory actions, that governance has, for the first time ever in the history of RTO or in the history of RTO regulations and regulating actions as we've seen it, this is the first time that governance has really had its own special spotlight. So I wanted to take a bit of extra time to go through it without having to rush through the information, and also give us quite a bit of Q&A time at the end of it. So, oops, I've just skipped forward. My apologies. However, having said that, if for any reason I don't get to answer your question at the end of the webinar, please feel free to email it to the ARCP team at info@arcp.edu.au. They will forward your email through to me. And guys, even if it wasn't a case of I didn't get to answer your question, even if it's a case of you at home later on tonight thinking about the webinar, no, I don't think so. Or after the webinar, at some stage, you think to yourself, damn, I really should have asked Alex this question or that question. As I said, just simply email your question through and the ARCP team will forward your question to me. Now, for those of you that are here almost always, forgive me for this repeat. However, guys, if you do email me questions, please make sure that you include your mobile number in your email as well. Because sometimes when I read a question, sometimes I go, you know what? It would be so much easier if I just spoke to the person and explained to them in person. Or sometimes it might be a case of, oh, I think I understand the question, but I need to speak with whoever's asking this to get more context, to be able to give them a more comprehensive answer. And look, I don't always get to phone everybody because obviously I'm one person answering questions after the webinar has stopped. And sometimes I'll, sort of sit in bed at 11 o'clock at night and I'll answer some questions. However, I won't phone you at 11 o'clock at night. However, as I said, please include your mobile number in your questions for me, and then at least I've got the option, if I do feel that you would benefit from me talking to you, at least I've then got the option of calling you, reaching out, and us having a quick chat. Guys, future webinars, please have a look at the ARCP website. It's there. Have a look what webinars are coming up. What we've been doing is we've been sort of posting the webinars probably the week of, only because I'm sick and tired of coming up with really cool webinar topics, doing all the work, doing the preparation, posting it online, and then one of the other idiot consultants come and go, oh, Alex has got such a cool topic, let me go and do it before she does. Probably just a bit of a thing I'm going through at the moment. I'll get over it. But like I said, keep an eye on the webinars. Also, I think, I could be mistaken, but I think that there is an option on the website here to actually subscribe to emails, so that you can get an email of, that was silly of me, so that you can get an email of what the next webinar topic will be, and you can get the send-outs. Guys, as always, a very quick look at what ASQA is currently doing. New registration. So there's been, and I'm going to run through them bit by bit, there's been quite a bit of activities with applications for initial registration. ASQA has been fairly busy with them. However, they also are doing a lot more due diligence from their side. on the actual prospective RTO owner than they have in the past. So if you are looking at applying for a new registration for an RTO, or perhaps you are in the process of applying, or perhaps your application is in and you are simply just waiting for an audit date, they are doing things differently these days than they did them 12 months ago. So if any of you are out there and like I said, if you are either thinking of starting a new RTO or registering for a new RTO, if you're in the process of applying for a new RTO, or if you are waiting for an audit date, by all means, reach out to me and I'm happy to give you a quick rundown on what that journey would look like for you. But like I said, yes. And as far as ASQA is concerned, and it's interesting. We've had, I think I saw the other day that in the past 12 months, I think we've had almost 200 applications for new registrations that have been lodged. And I think of that, don't hold me to count on this, but I think of that, the number 162 keeps on sticking. So I think we've had 162 new RTO registrations in the last 12 months or somewhere along there. ASQA are so busy at the moment with sanctions. Domestic RTOs are being whacked, but they're still whacking international colleges left, right, and center. And we've been working, when I say we, the vet prep team, myself, we've been working quite heavily and quite steadily with a number of CRICOS providers that, like I said, are just being whacked left, right, and center. You know, we saw this kind of activity with CRICOS providers start approximately 23, 24-ish. It has gone absolutely ballistic in the last 12 months. And you'll hear me say every single webinar, you know, when we get to the stage, if you are a CRICOS provider, please make sure that you are ASQA ready at all times, because, excuse me, they are having a field day with CRICOS providers. If you are a CRICOS provider and you do have a concern on anything that is happening, get hold of me. I'm quite happy to chat with you because, yeah, as I said, CRICOS providers are being sanctioned left, right, and center. It doesn't mean that domestic providers aren't getting their fair share of ASQA attention as well. They absolutely are. But it almost seems as if the bigger part of ASQA's focus is on CRICOS, but I'm going to repeat it. If you are a domestic provider, it doesn't mean that you are out of the woods or that ASQA isn't looking at domestic providers. I'm simply suggesting that they are using a bit more or a greater percentage of their resources on CRICOS activities than domestic, but not that much either. Also, remember that if you have got any kind of state funding contract, if you are at risk of being non-compliant with your state funding contract, if the state funding body come in to audit you, they will automatically, they either bring in an ASQA auditor as well, or their findings automatically go through to ASQA, and you could very well find that both regulators just hit you together if there are non-compliances. Also, if you have an ASQA audit, and you've got a state funding contract and ASQA finds non-compliances, they report you through to the funding body as well. So if you do have state funding, as I said, your risk profile goes up simply because you've then got two regulators that could potentially be breathing down your neck. Internal audits, well, basically following on from what I've just said, the best way for you to make 100% sure that your RTO is 100% ASQA ready at all times is do those internal audits. And guys, I say this at every single webinar. do not put the onus upon your compliance team to go and do these internal audits or the periodic internal audits solely by themselves, because essentially what you are doing is, if you are relying on your compliance team to go and do your periodic internal audits, I mean your quarterly, biannual and your annual audits, what you are doing is you're asking people to go and essentially go and audit their own work. And it's a bad idea for 1,000,010 reasons. It's a bad idea. And I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't be trusting your compliance team or that they won't know what they're doing, but give them a break, give your RTO and yourself some real self-assurance. Get your compliance consultant to come in and do your audit. Do not only rely on your internal audit team. Do not rely on them to simply go and audit their own work. Get your compliance consultant in. That is why compliance consultants are out there. And I know there are over 300 odd compliance consultants out there. There are enough compliance consultants. Just if you go and hire a compliance consultant, make sure that you ask the right questions, because not all compliance consultants have the same level of skill and expertise as the next one. So just be careful. And I'm saying this, there's a number of compliance consultants. We often get RTOs come to us and say, can you please help us fix X, Y, Z, because this and this consultant came in and did this and this. And sometimes we even get the consultants that will phone and say, Alex, we need help. We've just stuffed up with this client. Can you come in and help us fix things? So like I said, if you're going to go and engage a compliance consultant, just make sure that they actually know what they're talking about. Last one, guys. Your certificate of attendance for today will be issued within about 3 working days. Please don't email the ARCP guys and say, hey, do I get a certificate at the end of this? Please don't use that, or don't ask this in the Q&A session. The answer is yes, you'll get a certificate of attendance. It's going to take up to 3 days. And if people are emailing ARCP and saying, can I have my certificate, or do I get a certificate? What happens is the ARCP guys then take their effort and their attention off from actually issuing the certificates to having to go and reply to people's emails and say, yes, you were told you get one. So yes, you'll get one. Don't panic. Okay, that's enough for housekeeping. What I'm going to do is let's have a quick look. Excuse me. Let's have a quick look at what we're going to be covering today. But give me a sec for a bit of my tea before I cough myself to death. Oh, that's better. Do you know, it is freezing here in Melbourne. I knew that when I moved from Brisbane, I knew that I was moving to a really cold part of the world. But it's my first full winter here, and here I'm still acclimatizing. Anyway, today is not about a cold, grey winter's day in Melbourne. Today is about governance. And what I'm going to go through with you guys is, here we go. What I want to go through with you guys is this. We all know that governance has changed, and it has changed forever. And we know that what we are required to do these days vis-a-vis governance and what we were expected to do previously is completely different as well. We're going to have a look at how governance has changed, what governance in reality often looks like, not all the time, but often looks like within an RTO, and what ASQA actually expects from RTOs vis-a-vis governance. I'm going to go through some questions that every governing person should be asking. And when I've got the every governing person, I probably should have put every higher managerial agent, because ultimately the HMAs are responsible for what's happening within the RTO. I'm also going to be chatting with you guys about how to build a genuine self-assurance system, one that actually works and one that's actually reliable. We're going to look at the 5 biggest governance mistakes that RTOs make, and then we're going to look at your RTO and what happens if ASQA walks into your RTO. So let's have a look at how things operate in reality within an RTO. It is the beginning of January. We've all just come back from our year-end break. And oh my gosh, and we rested, and the dramas of last year is behind us. We're all excited about the new year, and we all have these wonderful resolutions about how this year we are going to do things differently within the RTO, and whatever differently might mean. Like, be it our systems, be it how we interact with our students, be it our marketing, be it whatever. We all come and all go, this year. The last year's behind us, the troubles of last year are behind us, clean slate, and we are going to have a magnificent year within this RTO. And we start the calendar year believing that everything is under control, and that from a governance point of view and from a compliance point of view, that everything is under control. Or if it isn't, if we're not believing that everything is 100% under control, we start the year off by believing that everything is almost 100%. And the little bit that isn't 100%, it's okay. What's the Aussie expression? She'll be okay, mate. So it's okay, because we're going to make everything work, because this is a new year. Last year's gone. Yay. And we also usually start off by believing that the RTO is compliant. And like I said, if there are gaps in the compliance, because last year was last year, we tend to think it's okay. We're going to get on top of them very, very, very quickly. And then we start trading, and then we start training, and we start doing our assessment, and we start interacting with our learners and our students, and we start doing what RTOs do. And when the warning signs start appearing, in the beginning, they don't really look like red flags. They might look like, that's a flag that used to be green, and it's sort of now going a bit from a different shade of green. Where I'm coming from is when the warning signs start happening, because we are so busy with what we are going to be doing this year, and because we've built this almost like this bubble of everything isn't as bad, we are not that non-compliant, etc., etc. We've built this bubble almost of self-confidence. And like I said, the warning signs begin to emerge slowly, and so often, from a governance point of view, we miss these warning signs. And perhaps we miss these warning signs because as the management team, or as the HMA, the high managerial agent, the CEO, the board, regardless, or depending on how your RTO structure is. But it's so often that we miss these signs because the governing people, the governing persons, don't actually have a finger on the pulse. And maybe the management team don't completely have a finger on the pulse. And we miss the warning signs. And then before we know it, the warning signs are no longer just signs, and they have almost snowballed into problems that are now starting to occur. And as the problems start to occur, it's so often to sit there and go, WTF, what is happening, or trying to process everything that, and while we're busy processing like a snowball, these problems, just they pick up speed and they compound and they get bigger and bigger and faster. And before we even know it, it's like, how did we get here? And then we stop. If we've got time, we stop and we go, holy macaroni, we've got to sort this out, and we've got to sort it out now. Sorry, let me quickly just get out of this. Apologies, guys. So as everything starts snowballing and we're going, holy macaroni, how the heck did we get here? It's so easy to either go into a a mode of it's compounded so much and it's so big. What do we do now? Or ASQA arrives unexpectedly. So that is what we see happening in RTO so often. And when I said earlier on that governance has changed forever, this is the problem, or this is the challenge that many RTOs do face when it comes to governance, because the 2025 RTO standards, remember that under the 2015 RTO standards, if an RTO had to be 100% compliant with 100% of the NVR Act and the legislations 100% of the time, but where an RTO had non-compliances, there wasn't any nice square peg where ASQA could go and hang their hat on and go, yep, you know what, we're now going to hit you with this as well. And then the 2025 standards came. And with the 2025 standards, basically what it boils down to is that governance is all about, it's no longer about having systems. It's no longer about being able to say, yep, you know what, my RTO does X, Y, Z, or it has this and this in the system in place, and go and speak to our compliance manager or to our CEO, and they'll tell you more. Under the 2025 standards, ASQA expects if you are a higher managerial agent or in a position of control within the RTO. So, and when I say position of control, under that banner, let's put anything that has manager in the title. ASQA expects you to know what your RTO does, how your RTO operates. And it's no longer just a case of, well, our system goes X, Y, Z, because they are questioning when they come to actually interacting with an RTO. They are actually having conversations with governing persons, with people in managerial positions, to find out if you actually know what the heck your RTO is doing, and if you actually know what the heck your RTO ought to be doing. So we've gone from being able to say, hey, you know, yes, we got these and these and these systems in place, to having to be able to evidence that you have actually got oversight of what the RTO is doing, and that you are able to take responsibility insofar as things that have gone haywire. You need to be able to take responsibility, and of course, self-identification, like always, is king. However, self-identification isn't enough anymore these days, because when we have a problem with our governance, the way that the 2025 RTO standards have been written and the implications of them is that if we have got failures, if we fail compliance, there is a big problem with our governance systems as well. And if we don't have proper governance systems in place, it means that the entire organization is potentially on the road to, I don't want to say failure, it seems so wrong. What I'm trying to say is the implications of the governance requirement under the 2025 standards is almost like umbrella wide. And ASQA are using the governance requirements of the 2025 standards to cast a wider net when it comes to reporting on non-compliances. So what I want to share with you is this. Just let me 1 second. Yes, I'm still alive. I'm just checking that I'm still live and that I haven't cut off the webinar for some reason. I tend to do things like that. So let's have a look at governance. And I've got your governance in reality versus what ASQA actually expects. And guys, when I speak about the reality of governance in some cases, I'm not saying that this is every single RTO. And that's why I've got here governance, the reality in some cases. So please don't send me a hate mail to say, oh my gosh, Alex, you said all RTOs is XYZ. It's some cases. So often we walk into an RTO and we see they've got governance in theory, but not in practice. And it's very, very easy to determine when an RTO has governance in theory, but not in practice, because you sit down with the CEO or the PO, you sit down with a person that is actually in charge of the day-to-day operations, and you start having a conversation with them. And very, very quickly, you find out that they actually don't really understand what is happening within that RTO. And they really don't know the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's almost as if when you have weak governance, and I should have put there weak slash almost zero governance, but that might have been a bit harsh. But an RTO has got really, really weak governance when the people that are accountable as the RTO's managerial persons and as the RTO's CEO, like I said, PO, director, etc., when they don't actually understand what is happening within the RTO, that is weak governance. You also get adequate governance where a person can tell you, they can give you a high level answer of how the RTO is being operated, but they cannot tell you enough of the ins and the outs. I remember years ago, we had a client, which I'm not going to name. They were up with, actually, no, I will, because they won't mind. So years ago, ARCP, we were working with ARCP because we do ARCP's compliance management for them. And I remember ARCP had this learner that was absolutely, oh my gosh, she was, anyway, ARCP finally said goodbye to her, I think after the third or the fourth instance of her committing blatant plagiarism. And guys, these are the days before AI. So when I say blatant plagiarism, I mean Google copy and paste, that kind of thing. And when they said goodbye to, and they went through all the processes, etc., but when they eventually terminated her learning journey with them, they knew that she was going to go off to ASQA. And I was actually, being their compliance consultant, I actually helped them because she also submitted this 1,010-page complaint to be investigated before she went to ASQA, etc. And I helped them investigate it. Anyway, long story short, so it comes to ARCP's post-initial registration audit. And the auditor turns around during the audit, the auditor turns around and starts speaking about a complaint that they had in from somebody. And remember, ASQA don't tell the RTOs, they don't identify the complainant. And the moment that the auditor said that, the CEO popped up and he said, yep, you are talking about insert learner's name. And he said, and this is exactly what happened. And I think it might have been, I think the audit might have been happening during COVID or just after COVID. So obviously it wasn't a face-to-face audit, and I think it was via Teams or something that we had this meeting with the auditor. But as soon as the CEO jumped and he said, "Yep, you're speaking about this learner," and I'll tell you the entire story, you should have seen the auditor's face. He was like almost like dumbstruck. Like, how can the CEO know exactly who they're talking about? Without the auditor actually having given anything away. Guys, that is an example of excellent governance. When the person or the persons within your RTO that is accountable under the NVR Act, the ESOS Act, the 2025 standards, all of those things, when the persons that are accountable know the ins and the outs of the RTO's operations to such a degree that you simply have to say, hey, can I talk with you about X, Y, Z? And they go, I know exactly what you're talking about. And it doesn't mean that you have to be doing all of these things yourself. There's nothing wrong with obviously delegating things to do with governance. But at the end of the day, if you are the captain of the ship being your RTO, if you're the captain of that ship, you should know exactly what is happening on your ship. And yes, the deckhands do, they clean the deck, and you've got the chaps that I was going to say climb up masks and change the flags, but I've realized this isn't a pirate ship we're talking about, and it's not the 1800s. But I think you get where I'm coming from, because what ASQA is expecting you as a governance as a governance, or the person that is in charge of governance, the person that has the oversight responsibility, what they are expecting you to do is, as I said, have such oversight of what is happening within your RTO, enough so that you can take complete accountability for things that is happening within your RTO. And when you make decisions, it's got to be evidence-based. So the days that we could sit there and go, you know what, it's a Thursday night, and actually it's a Friday night, and we're having drinks at the pub after work, and let's make decisions after the fifth beer. Those days are over. When we're making decisions, we've got to be able to show an evidence trail of what we did, how we did it, etc., etc., etc. Because so often the decisions that we are making can lead to continuous improvement, and we can't just go and do a knee-jerk reaction where continuous improvement is about. But also remembering that from a governance point of view, ASQA is expecting your RTO to have very, very, very robust self-assurance systems in place. And remember how I said earlier on that when it comes to your internal audits, make sure that you are doing them quarterly, biannually, and annually at least. And remember how I said earlier on that when it comes to your internal audits, don't expect your own compliance team to be auditing their own work. Guys, that's all part of having a really robust and a potentially successful self-assurance system in place within your RTO. Because remember, also from all of your activities, from your decision making, from the oversight that your governing persons have of the RTO. And as I said earlier on, in this instance, when we say governing persons, we're speaking about anybody with the word manager in their title. Having a look at what improvements we are making within the RTO, how we manage our risk. That is all part of your self-assurance. And that is what the 2025 standards are really expecting RTOs to do. Because remember, yes, the 2025 standards is very, very much learner-centric as we've come used to the standards being, but they are also focused heavily, heavily on RTOs actually being able to provide top-notch quality training and assessment services. And you can only go and deliver and provide top-notch training and assessment services if everything behind the scenes is running like clockwork. And the things behind the scenes that need to be running like clockwork, that is the governance, or that's part of your governance processes that we're talking about. It's part of your self-assurance processes that we're talking about. So there we go. So when it comes to asking questions, and I've been going on now for the past quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, about governance and about what we should be doing and how we should be ensuring, etc. So here are 5 questions that every governing person within your RTO should be asking. Before we go into the 5, and I know that you can start reading them, but before we go into the 5 questions, it isn't so much about the how do we know stuff, or it isn't so much about the why should stuff work properly. It is how do we know that stuff is working properly. It's what evidence do we have that stuff is working properly? How do we know that the assessments that our learners are using are valid? Remember, the 2025 RTO standards required all of us to make sure that our assessments were validated. As of the 2025 standards coming in, that our assessments had to be validated. And yes, even though now the requirements around validations has been relaxed, and now that we don't have the 3-year and the 2-year increments within our validation processes, we still need to go and be able to say or ask ourselves, how do we actually know that what we are doing is right, is robust, is safe, is full safe? And assessments, how do we know our assessments are valid? So if our question is, how do we know our assessments are valid? And sit and bear with me while I sit here and I sort of try and just unpack this a little bit and role play with you guys in a webinar, which is kind of strange. We'll be sitting and be going, well, how do we know that our assessments are valid? Well, because they've been validated. Fantastic, very happy with that. Who were they validated by? They were validated by Peter and Sue and Tom. Great to hear that. What are Peter's credentials as a validator? What are Sue's credentials as a validator? And what are Tom's credentials as a validator? And we list them off, and then the question gets asked. Okay, so what kind of questions were asked, and what was determined, what was investigated during the validation process? So can you guys see how I'm taking one single question, i.e., how do we know that our assessments are valid? And I'm unpacking them. And I'm unpacking them as a person who is accountable for the overall compliance within the RTO, the person who's accountable for the RTO doing the right thing, for the RTO being a quality provider. I'm unpacking them as a governing person ought to. Not just have one question or have my question, ask my question, get the answer and go, that's cool, move on to the next one. Because we need to be digging down. So if I am your ASQA auditor and I say to you, hey, Mary, how do you know your assessments are valid? And you go, well, because you've had them audited. Validated. I say to you, tell me the process that you went through, including the people that did the validations, that you have this information. Other questions that you should be asking, or that your governance persons should be asking is, how do we know that our trainers and assessors are actually doing their jobs properly? So I'm going to pause here for about 5.5 seconds, if I can shush for that long. And I'm going to ask you to just think for yourself for one moment. How do you know that the trainers and assessors within your RTO are actually doing their jobs properly? And when we speak about doing their jobs properly, there's a few components in it. How do we know that our trainers and assessors are delivering training properly, are engaging with their learners, are the kind of trainers and assessors that their learners want to be with, and don't just simply show up for a training session because they have to? How do we know that? How do we establish that our trainers and assessors, more than just doing VET PD, because it doesn't take much to do VET PD, how do we know that our trainers and assessors are bloody good? How do you establish that within your RTO? I'm going to ask you to maybe make a note of that question, and maybe you want to ponder that at some stage or the other. And then my next question is, how do we know that our assessors are actually doing their jobs properly? Do you know how often we go into RTO? So just give you guys a bit of background. So although Vet Prep doesn't do garden variety compliance, like the other 337 compliance consultants out there. We go in and we do, obviously we do audits, and we help with RTOs, their governance and governance boards, and setting up systems and all those really fun and interesting things. But do you know, and also obviously when RTOs are in trouble, when ASQA is sort of breathing down their necks and all those kind of things. I know you guys have all stalked me on LinkedIn, so you know exactly what I do. I'm not going to carry on about that, but do you know how often we walk into an RTO and we see blatant evidence of ticking and flicking? Still, and this is 2026. It's not like we're sitting in the dark ages. It's not like we're sitting back in 2008 or 2006. This is 2026, and we still walk in, and trainers and assessors are still ticking and flicking. Or we get there, and especially with oh my gosh, I'm going to now get hate mail. Actually, I don't care. Send me your poison arrows, send me your hate mail. I actually don't care, because I am going to say this. Do you know how often, especially with short courses, we walk in there and you've got 10 people that have completed a forklift course. So I'm just now pulling a course out of the air, over 2 days, despite the fact that the nominal hours is far longer than that. But when you look at the written assessments, you've got 10 written assessments where the answers are almost verbatim. And you sit there and you go, that can only mean one thing. If they've all got the same answers, almost verbatim, somehow or the other, those people had access to the answers in the answer guide. We still see it. So how do you know that your trainers and assessors, maybe they, yes, no doubt that they meet the credential policies through and through, or the requirements of the credential policies to an nth degree? How do you know that your trainers and assessors are actually top quality training and assessing professionals? When was the last time that you actually sat in on a training session? And yes, I know that when our trainers and assessors know that they're being observed, it's human nature. They conduct themselves differently than what they normally do. And I was going to say that they become better, but that would be insulting to a lot of trainers and assessors. But have a look and have a think about what your RTO does to ensure that your trainers and assessors actually deliver quality training and assessment services. An RTO, oh my gosh, guys, I'm so sorry. I've just realized that I gave myself an extra half an hour today, and still I'm yakking along. I'm going to speed it up just a little bit. But another question that your RTO and that the governing persons in your RTO should be asking is, how do we know when our learners, when our students are at a risk of being disadvantaged? And disadvantage has got so many, or the word disadvantage has got so many different contexts to it. It could be disadvantage due to a lack of student support, due to trainers and assessors, due to our assessment material. There's so many different tentacles to that. How do we know that our students aren't being disadvantaged? And how could we find out if they're not? Because, guys, these kind of questions is what makes the difference between just another RTO and a quality training provider. We all know that the 2025 standards require us to do have risk management systems in place, to have risk registers, to identify risks, etc. Are there any risks within our RTO that are not necessarily appearing in our reports? And how do we go and establish if they are and if they are not? And then lastly, if an ASQA auditor were to interview me tomorrow and they ask questions along these lines, how am I, as the governing person, or how are we as the governing persons, as the managerial team, how are we going to actually fare in that interview process? Because if one of us fails the interview, well, then we've all got problems, and the RTO has got a problem. So I spoke earlier on about having a genuine self-assurance system, the kind of self-assurance system that is more than just self-assurance on paper or electronically these days. What does a really true, genuine, robust self-assurance system look like? Well, obviously, risk identification, risk registers, internal audits. And once again, guys, I'm hammering on this point. Internal audits not only by your compliance team, but by your compliance consultant as well. When does your compliance consultant come in? What are they looking at? Do you guys actually have your internal audit plan? And when I say internal audit plan, do you actually have a diary or an annual plan of when internal audits are being done by your compliance team and then also by your compliance consultant? Board reporting. So not every single RTO does have a board of directors, but if you do have a board of directors, how often is the board being notified of what is happening within the RTO, and when they are being notified, are they actually challenging any of the findings, anything that is being reported on? And if you don't have a board of directors, does your RTO at a minimum have a governance board that can sit there and not help you or help you steer your ship if you needed to, and not sitting there and telling you how to run your RTO and essentially taking your business over, but do you at least have a governance board that can help you ensure that how your ship is being steered is actually to the benefit of your ship and to the sector and to all of the stakeholders and to the learners and to all of these various stakeholders, internal and external, including once again learners, that we need to satisfy. I'm wondering if I need to do a webinar on governance boards. Don't know, let me think about it. Are we actually doing our trend analysis, our escalation processes? Do we have a process in place where if the wheel starts wobbling, that we don't wait until it's fallen off and we're now just driving on the drive shaft? I think so. But do we actually have a process in place that where something starts going wrong, we can escalate it, and we can escalate it in sufficient or in a timely manner so that we can actually fix things instead of having it completely break down? How do we collect evidence of what we've done? Because guys, remember, we work in a sector where evidence is king. And remember, we can't actually issue any learner, any individual with any kind of AQS certification documentation unless they have provided us with sufficient evidence of their competency. And just like we can't go and issue AQF certification documentation without sufficient evidence of competency, from a realistic point of view, if we don't have evidence of our practices, if we don't have evidence of how our systems work, and that we have systems, if we don't have evidence of all of these things, it didn't happen. Simple as. It just didn't happen. I was interstate recently, and I was working with an RTO that, like a lot of RTOs, and this is a Cricos RTO as well, like a lot of RTOs, where the RTO operator said to me, Alex, we do this. I know we do this. And I go, well, show me the evidence. And they went, but we don't have the evidence, but I can tell you that we do it. And like I do every single time that I have conversations with RTO operators like this, I just say to them, you know what? It's one thing that you actually do it, but if you don't have the evidence to substantiate your claim that you do it, it doesn't count. because that's how it works in the real world. That is how it works when ASQA is with you. If you don't have the evidence, it just didn't happen. Another really good and another essential part of a genuine, a robust self-assurance system that is actually worthwhile even being your self-assurance system is ensuring that there's a mechanism in place, that there's a process in place on closing the loops on the issues. So it's one thing to identify that, hey, you know what, we got a problem over here, and let's go and fix it and do it over there. But it's a case of, if we've identified that something needs to happen, do we actually have a process in place to make sure that at the end of the day, the loop has been completed and what we identified as needing to be improved upon or needing to be completely rebuilt or needing to do whatever, what is our system for ensuring that that loop has actually been completed? I was in Brisbane with an audit with one of my Brisbane team members. I think it must have been around about March, April, May-ish. I forget. It was recent, and we were sitting and looking at the continuous improvement register, and I think I'm probably going to be quoting numbers. So I'm probably going to be putting numbers a little bit from the sky right now. My numbers aren't exact, but I think they might have had 6 or 8 items in their CIR that needed to be fixed. And yet the CIR only showed, I think it was 1 or 2 items that were actually closed off. And I'm going back to, or that was going back over about 12, maybe 18 months. And when we sat down there and we spoke with the owner and with the compliance team, and we said, okay, what happened here? And was there a resolution here? And what happened there? Some of the things had been closed off, but the evidentiary documentation required to be able to loop or to close the loop off in their system, in their continuous improvement, complaints and appeals policy systems, wasn't there. So coming in and from an external compliance consultant going in and not knowing what the backstory is, which your ASQA auditor doesn't have when they come in, it looked like all of these complaints had been lodged. They were all meant to be followed up and then treated as, some of them treated as continuous improvements, but it was only in the one register, and there was no evidence that anything had happened to that. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I mean by there's got to be a process in place where we can ensure that we are actually closing loops. So the biggest 5, I'm just quickly doing a time check. I'm so passionate about compliance. I'm getting so incredibly in the moment that I'm constantly just needing to do a time check. And in case it isn't obvious, guys, I'm actually really enjoying this time with you today. And then in case it isn't obvious, was very tongue in the cheek. So the biggest 5, or the 5 biggest governance mistakes that people make is when your governing persons rely entirely on what is being reported to them, or even when your management team is relying entirely on what is being reported to them, but without ever going and saying, well, why do you say X, Y, Z? One of the things that I love, because yes, I do a lot of forensic auditing, and I also do quite a bit of auditing when RTOs are getting ready to be sold. I do a lot of acquisition or merger acquisition audits, and I do audits when RTOs are getting ready to be sold, and I do acquisition audits when an RTO is has got a purchase in. So I do a lot of really interesting auditings. Audit activities. And one of the things that I really love is sitting down during an audit or at the end of an audit and having a discussion with the governing persons of the RTO and saying to them, hey, we found, or our founding is X, Y, Z, A, B, C. And they sit there and they go and they ask me, based on what? What are you basing this on, and why are you saying ABC? I love that, because when I have that kind of interaction with an RTO operator, it's such an indication that it's not as if they're sitting there and challenging what I'm saying and trying to say, hey, Alex, you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, most people realize that I actually do know what I'm talking about, but it's then trying to get a better understanding of why things broke down that led us to discover what we did discover. And even when I don't have people quizzing me at the end of an audit, but I'm giving them their audit findings, I will go into detail and I will say to them, hey, you know what? We found this based on that and that and that and that, and based on all of these things, our overall finding is A, B, C, and blah, 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 blah. And I give people this kind of feedback, because even if they're not asking for it, because it helps the governing persons of that RTO actually understand what the heck is happening in their RTO. Because best they hear it from me, then hear it from an ASQA auditor, because by the time that ASQA's walked in, it's too late. If we found that many non-compliances, by the time that you've been ASQA, you're screwed. At least hear it from your compliance consultant. But if you're working with your compliance consultant and if they're giving you feedback and saying, hey, you know what, everything is hunky-dory, we've just reviewed your trainer assessor credentials and it's hunky-dory. I know it's so easy to turn around and say, oh, fantastic, let's move on. But sit there and say to your compliance consultant, cool, I hear you. Tell me what you reviewed to come to that conclusion. Ask questions, because at the end of the day, as a governing person, and once again, remember, we agreed yonks ago when we started this webinar that when we say governing person or persons, we're including anybody who's managing with the word manager in their title. Ask these questions, understand what the person is saying. Make sure that you understand exactly the backstory of what they're saying, because that's part of your job. That's part of your responsibility within the RTO. Challenge what people are telling you. Even if it is exactly what you want to hear, challenge them. Do you know how often there's a compliance consultancy out there that I think the chap that runs it, him and I, I don't think we've ever exchanged Christmas cards, and we certainly never will. It's been like that for, oh my gosh, I think he's been in the game now for about 12, 13 years. But it's been that way ever since he came into this game. And yes, he comes to my webinars. I don't go to his. I'm a bit busy. Anyway, so often, where was I going with this? Oh, so often we'll go through and we'll go through and do audits where they've already come through, and people have sort of gone, you know what, we want a second opinion because we don't quite understand, or we don't quite think that we can rely too much on this audit report. And it's sad. And look, he's by far not the only person. There's a lot of consultants that just simply just screw up. But it's a case of having a look, and unfortunately, I do come across consultants that tell an RTO what they believe the RTO wants to hear. And I pull my hair out. I get so frustrated, because at the end of the day, I, as a consultant, and I'm speaking about all the consultants out there, our jobs is not to tell you what we think you want to hear. Our jobs is to sit you down and say, you know what, based on this and this and this information that we have evaluated, with these and these and these benchmarks, this is where your RTO is at today. And if you received an ASQA love letter tomorrow, this is what you're going to be looking at. And somebody said to me, the other day in one of the webinars, I had a question along the lines of, but what do you do if you've told somebody that they are non-compliant and they just don't listen? And my response is, there's nothing I can do. If I've told the right person that they've got issues, if I've gone as high as I can, to the right person, or the person as high up on the ladder as I can. If I've said to them, you have got issues and they don't want to action it, it's not up to me. It's that old expression, you can lead a horse to the water. You can't force it to drink, even if you break its damn neck. It's exactly the same thing. So my job as a consultant isn't to sit here and make RTOs or to try and make an RTO operator believe me. My job as a consultant is to tell them the issues that have been identified, where their strengths and weaknesses lie within their compliance or within their operation from a compliance point of view, as well as from a holistic point of view, operationally. But more than that, that's up to the RTO to do. And I'm going to use that because I apologize. I've sort of got a little bit off the trodden path there. But if we then measure I'm trying to now work this into measuring activities, because if we looking at measuring our activities, not our outcomes, the only way to truly measure our activities is to have a really, really good idea of what the outcomes are. So it's one thing to go, what, our trainers and assessors are there and they are delivering, and we've got Johnny in the class and he's got his 20 students in there. He's obviously doing his job. Activity does not equal the outcome that you need to be able to show in order to be compliant. And activity does not always equal, and hardly ever equals, the outcomes that you need to be able to have in place as a quality provider. So don't ever sit there and don't ever go, we're doing everything right because we are doing these and these activities. Remember, activities are merely activities, and it is the outcomes that we need to be looking at. The outcomes that we then evaluate against the benchmarks. Does that make sense? Gosh, I hope it does. One of the things that so many RTOs come unstuck on is treating their internal audits merely as something that just has to get done. It's just another waste of time. And yes, guys, I absolutely know that compliance it doesn't generate revenue. It is purely a cost center. And I know that compliance is hell of expensive. I know that compliance practitioners are expensive. I know that compliance consultants are expensive. I know that your entire compliance systems within your RTO is expensive if you are doing it correctly. However, even though your compliance is a cost center and not a profit center, remember that without compliance, you're not going to have an RTO. So yes, compliance can be a hell of a nuisance. I completely get that. And I know that there are, I so often hear RTO owners and they say to me they are so frustrated because their compliance manager or their compliance consultant, their compliance person is always a hindrance towards growth, because they're always so concerned, we can't do this, we can't do that because we got a problem here because it's not compliant. And I so often hear that, in fact, from everything that RTO owners tell me, I have formed the absolute opinion that 99.9% of compliance consultants, actually, I'll rewind that. Let's go for 99.2536% of compliance consultants are so focused on compliance that they don't have the ability to actually have a big picture view and go, okay, we need, we're looking at a growth period, we're looking at revenue growth, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, compliance is here, and how can we incorporate both of those together? Because that is what compliance should be. Compliance shouldn't be a standalone stick in the mud that goes, we can't do X, Y, Z until we've done ABC. Doesn't have to be it all the time. It is so, I know, maybe I find it easy to intertwine compliance with growth strategies, etc., because my life pre the vet sector, I was running companies. So, I've been running companies and businesses for most of my life. And maybe that's why I'm lucky. I get the full picture. However, what I want to come back to is I know that your compliance operations is merely a cost center. I know it's annoying. I know it's damn annoying when your compliance practitioner comes and they go, we can't do X, Y, Z. We've got a problem here. We need to go fix ABC, and it is big and it is urgent. Nobody wants to hear that. But guys, if that is the reality, then you need to hear it. So please stop treating, or if your RTO treats internal audits like just another annoyance that we have to go through, please don't do that, because you're going to be doing it to the detriment of your RTO's registration. Also confusing assurance with documentation. Remember what I said earlier on? If we don't have the documentary evidence that something has happened, then it simply didn't, and it doesn't exist. Last one that we're going to go through before we go into Q&A is, if ASQA walked into your RTO tomorrow, can your governance person or persons, including anybody with the title manager in their or including anybody that has the word manager in their title, can your governance persons demonstrate that they know the risks within your RTO? Because every single RTO does have risks. Your risks don't have to be catastrophic. And in a lot of businesses, if risk management is done properly and risk mitigation is done properly, it's a case of we are aware of the risk, but we know how to treat or we know how to mitigate it so it doesn't happen. But if ASQA walked in tomorrow and asked your governing persons, can they actually demonstrate with confidence and provide the ASQA auditor sufficient confidence that they know the risks present within your organization? Are they able to demonstrate that they've asked the right questions? Remember earlier on, when we sat there, we were unpacking, when we went to the 5 questions that RTOs need to ask. Remember how we were unpacking those? Let's quickly go back. Remember how we asked the question, how do we know our assessment is valid? What evidence tells us that our trainers are actually performing? So if ASQA walked in tomorrow, your governing persons, would they be able to demonstrate that they know the business to such a degree that they've asked the right questions and they actually have the answers to the right questions that the ASQA auditor is going to be asking them? Is there evidence? Can your governing persons, can they actually demonstrate that they aren't just taking information provided to them as just being read, but they've actually gone and they've actually made sure that that information is actually correct? They've challenged the information presented to them. Does your governing persons understand the learner outcomes that your RTO is producing and delivering? Remember we said very, very early on when I started off with the little tale of it's the beginning of the year and we're all so happy and we're all refreshed after our year-end break, and we forgot about the horrible things that happened last year, and we're all in la la land, and we're a bit delusional maybe because we think everything is hunky-dory, and when the first red flags start appearing, we don't actually recognize them as red flags. Did we see the warning signs early enough, and did we act on them early enough to take them from warning signs to no longer present? Or did we sit there and did we just not act on them and they became catastrophic? If ASQA walked in tomorrow, can the governing persons within your RTO demonstrate how they have monitored improvement within the RTO? And have they got evidence of all of this stuff, guys? Because remember, I said earlier on, I think I've said a few times now, that if we can't produce the evidence, it never happened. I'm so glad we booked the extra time in for the webinar today. I'm so glad we didn't stick to the normal 60 minutes because I just feel that I've had this fantastic opportunity to be able to just discuss these things with you. So let's go over to questions and answers. And guys, I'm going to ask, I'm probably, my voice is busy just starting to give in a little bit. So let me just have a bit of water and then, oh, excuse me, let me just catch a breath. Okay, so let's look at our questions that have come through. Shane, you have asked whether I am suggesting that having systems in place is no longer good enough. Shane, it's not that having systems in place is no longer good enough. We still need our systems. It's more about, are we actually using our systems for robust operational outcomes, or do we simply have systems that, so we can say we got a system for this, but we actually don't put the system into operation? To give you guys an idea, and Shane, I hope this is going to help you a bit better for me to be able to contextualize my what I'm saying here, is we all know that we need to independently verify the authenticity of any AQF certification document that is presented to us, either by staff or by trainers and assessors or by learners seeking credit transfer, because we all know that even today, falsification of AQF certificates is still rife. So it's one thing to have a system in place to actually go and verify it. So our clients that we work with, we always suggest to them that, and even in their policy for this, is their policy should be that they don't accept somebody giving them a verified AQF certification document, that they will go and do the verification themselves. And we all know that the best way to do it is to let the person let them give your RTO access to go into their UZ records and to go and download their UZ statement. Now, if that is the system that you have in place, having the system in place is fantastic. Is the system being used in the way that it should be used? I was with an RTO recently, and let me just stop this for a second. Give me a second. I was with an RTO recently, and they didn't have the system, and their newly hired, I think was their academic manager, came in with a really interesting looking UZ transcript. And I said to the, or I suggested, didn't say I suggested, to the RTO owner, I said to, look, what we really want to do is we want to implement immediately that the only way that we will accept verification of an AQF certificate is if we actually go onto the UZ portal ourselves. So we started off with this chap, and we got all of the staff to give us access to the UZ while I was there. And lo and behold, this guy that had actually presented to us a printout of his UZ, and the printout was only about 2.5 years old. When we actually compared it to his current UZ, where we actually went onto the USI portal ourselves, discrepancies, I think, is a really good word. So Shane, sorry, long roundabout way to go back to your question. Yes, we have to have systems, but it's also a case of we need to make sure our systems are actually being used, and the systems that we have in place are robust enough and that they are actually helpful to us operationally, and not just something that is just being developed and it's just simply sitting there. Does that make sense? Lovely, thank you. I've got a question here from Julie. Hi, Jules. Nice to see you again. Julie, you have asked about the train and assessor credentials. How do we ensure that our train and assessor credentials are authentic? I think I've just covered that in what I spoke how I've answered Shane's question. Julie, if I haven't adequately answered your question, shoot me an email if you don't mind. Um, I've got another question here from Leon. Sorry, Leon, you've just asked, under the 2025 standards, where do we stand insofar as training and assessment strategies? Leon, I am going to be a little bit rude and suggest to you I'm quite happy to answer this question one-on-one, but given that today was all about governance and all about TASs, do you mind if I do this with you one-on-one? It's just that I don't know that everybody else would be interested in that. I'm so sorry to do this, mate, but yeah. Annie, you've asked if ASQA come in and they sanction us, what will they sanction us for? Whew. Annie, I'm going to ask you, do you just want to reword that a little bit? Okay, it's coming through. Thank you. So, okay, so Annie, what you're really asking is if ASQA came in and they sanctioned us, will they be sanctioning us for everything on our operations? Annie, I'm going to suggest, won't you please shoot that question off to info@ascp.edu.au, include, include your mobile number. Sorry, my voice is just busy going. Include your mobile number because I think I would prefer to call you and have this discussion. Guys, I'm going to be so rude. I'm so sorry. My voice is just suddenly going down the gurgler. I'm not going to do any more questions. I've got to go and try and keep my voice. Can you please email your questions to, where's the PowerPoint? Can you please go and email your questions to info@arcp.edu.au and I will get back to you, but I need to go. And just get my voice back. I hope you guys all have a fantastic day. Enjoy the rest of your week. Yay, tomorrow's Friday. Have a brilliant weekend, and I'll see you guys soon. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye.